Now, if many of you haven't picked up the theme of this morning, it is leadership. And the Planning Vision Committee, a few months ago, when they're planning and through the process of everything, decided that it would be good to recognize our leaders. And I applaud them for that, because it is very good to recognize your leaders. Recognize those who spend hours here at this church and at home preparing for the activities that run this church. And we are so grateful this morning. I just want to say to you that we are very grateful for the time, for the talents, for the faithfulness that you bring each day when you come to serve God. But this morning I wanted to look at qualities of a godly leader. And as I started my research to try to find out some godly leaders, the one that came to my mind was Joshua. And I know that we had recently studied Joshua in our Bible study, so I had this fresh in my mind, and I guess that's probably why he popped there so quickly. So we're going to look at Joshua and his leadership and the qualities of a godly leader this morning that we can receive from the example of Joshua. I came across this illustration. It says, a young second lieutenant of Fort Bragg discovered that he had no change when he was about to buy a soft drink from the vending machine. Don't you hate it when you don't have change and you're at the vending machine? It's the worst thing in the world. So this guy, he flagged down a passing private and asked him, "Do you have change for $1?" The private said cheerfully, "I think so. Let me take a look." The lieutenant drew himself up stiffly, and he said, "Soldier, that's no way to address an officer." We'll start all over again. He says to the private, "Do you have change for $1?" Remember, he's at attention. Chest probably popped out. The private comes to attention, and he saluted him smartly, and he says, "No, sir, I don't." So what changed? What changed? A few seconds ago, yes, he thought he had some money in his pocket. But all of a sudden, he doesn't. It was the attitude of the lieutenant that changed. As soon as he decided to puff out his chest and take authority and think he was bigger than the other privates, his response changed as well. And I wonder this morning, have we ever looked at the different leaders that we have in our world today? Have we ever considered the styles of leadership that these individuals have and how differently people respond to leaders? I've been in the presence of leaders. I've had managers. I've had other leaders that I'm telling you, they ask me to do something, I don't know if I'd really do it, because they are not leading by example. And then I've had, and I'll speak for my last employer, I worked for a gentleman who was my manager, and I'm going to tell you something. If that man had asked me to go out and move the stuff on the floor, he didn't just ask me or ask the other salespeople to go do it. He was out there with us, shifting everything on the floor, with the broom, with the mop, whatever needed to be done. He was there. He led by example. He was a true leader. Now, a leader is described to be a person who leads or commands a group, an organization, or even a country. And we live in a society that has many types of leaders. And I thought about our leaders. Think about our Prime Minister, the members of the House of Commons. They have been elected or chosen by us, the people, to oversee the affairs of the people and the affairs of this great nation of Canada. Bring it back home to Newfoundland. We have a Premier, members of the House of Assembly. They've been elected by us, the people, to oversee the affairs of us, the people, and the affairs of this great province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And yes, we've drawn lots of questions, and there's been lots of mention of the political leadership of this province over the last number of months. But we always need to be mindful that these people that we have placed in leadership roles of our country, of our province, they're humans. They will make mistakes, as we all do, and there will be times when we desire not to follow them, and there will be times that we will choose to follow right behind them because they have the best interest of us at heart. We may not always agree with the decisions that they make, but as believers, we always need to uphold them in prayer, asking that God would be part of the decision-making process. And I pray that daily, as you do in your devotions, that you will pray for our Prime Minister, pray for Justin Trudeau, pray for those who we've elected to the House of Commons, so that they will not forsake God and make decisions that they desire, but they will make decisions that keep God in the picture. And the same thing for our province, for our Premier, and for our people, our members of the House of Assembly. Pray that God will just use them, still speak to them. And when they're in the process of making decisions, that He will convict them to make sure they keep God in the picture. Now, when we look at leaders past and present, either secular or religious leaders, we need to be mindful that most of them raised to become great leaders, not because they were born great leaders, but because they graduated from the school of hard knocks. And some people look at a person and they say, a person is a natural-born leader. It might happen on a rare occasion. There might be a natural-born leader. But most great leaders come because they've graduated, because life has been cruel to them. Life has not been favorable to them all the times. And they've learned from their mistakes. They've learned from putting their foot in their mouth. And they've not done it again. So that's what makes a great leader. So it is in Scripture. Many of the great leaders of the Old and New Testament had graduated from the school of hard knocks themselves. They had life experience. They had proven the faithfulness of God through those hard times. Now, when we think of great leaders of the Bible, I'm sure most of us would think of Moses. That man must have had some patience to be leading those Israelites all around the desert. He must have had patience with them. And I'm sure there was times he lost that patience. Then we think of King David and his leadership. We might think about Daniel. And of course, who could forget about the leadership of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament? But from the passage of Scripture that we read earlier, I want us to look at and draw our attention to another great leader of God, Joshua. And from Joshua's life and character, we can learn helpful lessons on spiritual leadership that we can follow as current leaders and potential leaders of this church and of the church. From our text this morning, I would like us to look at 3 godly qualities of a good leader. They are: a good leader must have a servant's heart. They should be people who are courageous, and they should be people who put God first. Joshua was a young man who grew up under difficult circumstances. His parents were slaves living under the bondage of the Egyptians. Yet Joshua became a dynamic spiritual leader. The key to his leadership was found in God. And our hope today is that the fact that God uses people, regardless of their past experiences, regardless of their past. And He can use you this morning, if you will allow Him to. Joshua witnessed heartache and suffering. As a child, he saw his family being beaten and suffering under the strong hand and the oppression of the Egyptians. And I wonder if that's where Joshua learned his servant's heart. You see, the first quality that I would like us to look at this morning is a servant's heart. According to God's plan for leadership, the key is not upward mobility, but downward mobility, one writer writes. God said to Joshua, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give thee," to the Israelites. Just as Moses had been a servant of the Lord, now Joshua was going to be a servant of the Lord. And just as Moses listened to God, now Joshua was to listen to the Lord for these instructions. Now, a person with a servant's heart is teachable. He or she doesn't have all the answers to life's problems. They don't have the final answer on all subjects. A servant looks to their master and listens to the master for assignments and instructions. And Jesus practiced downward mobility when he entered into public life. The greatest example of servant leadership is Jesus Christ. He said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many." Matthew 20:25-28. I came across this illustration. A large group of European pastors came to one of D.L. Moody's Northfield Bible conferences in Massachusetts in the late 1800s. Following the European custom of the time, each guest put his shoes outside his room to be cleaned by the hall servants overnight. But of course, this was America, and there were no hall servants. While walking the dormitory halls that night, Moody saw the shoes, and determined not to embarrass his brothers, he mentioned the need to some ministerial students who were there. But met with their own silence or porous excuse, Moody returned to his dorm. He gathered up the shoes, and he alone in his room cleaned and polished the shoes of his guest. Now, only the unexpected arrival of a friend in the midst of the work revealed the secret. And when the foreign visitors opened the doors the next morning, their shoes were shined. They never knew by whom. Moody told no one, but his friend told a few people. And during the rest of the conference, different men volunteered to shine the shoes in secret. He was a man with a servant's heart, and that was the basis of his true greatness. And if we want to experience success in life and as a leader, then we have to have a servant's heart. We need to practice serving others more than expecting others to serve you. Another godly leader is people who are courageous. And as we read through the passage this morning, did anyone take notice of the times that courageous appeared in the text? Did anybody take notice of it? I'll tell you, it appears 4 times in the text. 4 times we read the word courageous. One of those times, Joshua is told to be strong and very courageous. In essence, God is saying to Joshua, don't be deterred by the dangers that you may be facing. As a leader of the chosen people, you will experience pain just as Moses did. But don't lose heart. Be brave. Just as I was with my servant Moses, I will be with you. God does not just place Joshua in charge without giving him instructions. As we read further into our text, we see that God desires that his new leader is to obey the laws that he had given his servant Moses on Mount Sinai. They are to be the guides that will keep Joshua from straying from them. And it is because of Joshua's obedience of these laws that he becomes a successful leader. I came across another illustration. Sometimes the illustrations amaze me because they're things that I didn't know before. But this one came across on about the Empress of Ireland. And I'm not sure if many of you know about the ship of the Empress of Ireland. But it was a vessel that went down, and the staff band was on it, and there was clergy on it. But it went down with 130 Salvation Army officers on board. 109 of them were drowned, and not one of the bodies were picked up with a life preserver. The survivors told how when the Salvation Army officers discovered that there were not enough life preservers on board to go around. They took off their own life jackets and strapped it on other men, saying, I can die better than you. They found their courage in God. They didn't even need an officer in charge to keep them in line, but they willingly gave up their lives for others, for one reason alone. They knew God in a personal way, and they trusted Him. We need leaders who are courageous, those who are not discouraged by the danger of being an effective leader. Because sometimes decisions will be made that others may not agree with, might make you unpopular. But let me remind you this morning that if they're for the advancement of the kingdom of God, that we need to stand by our decisions. I'm proud to say this morning that we have leaders in this church who have kingdom building as their number one priority. Many of our leaders spend countless hours here and they seek no recognition, but they do it because they love God. They do it because they want to see the doors of this church open for many years to come. That's important, folks. When you've got leaders who are here as a pastor, when I've got a leadership team behind me who are here and supporting this journey, we can go away on days and not have to worry about everything that's happening here because we know things are taken care of. We know that we have capable people back here who are in control. That makes us feel good. We're so grateful for the leadership that is here and for those God has called into leadership roles. We want to just again, I want to say thank you for those leaderships. You know who you are, you know the roles that you play, you know the things that you do behind the scenes, and we're so grateful for that this morning. You see, Joshua had proven to be a man of courage, not because of who he was, but because of who he trusted. And when the spies were sent into the promised land to report back their findings, Joshua, along with Caleb, were the only two who reported back that they should indeed take the possession of the land God had promised his people. We read in Numbers 14:6-9, Joshua and Caleb, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into the land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and He will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Joshua knew that the battle that they were about to embark on was not theirs, but God's. He was about to fulfill His promise to their forefathers, and they were about to be the benefactors of this promise. All they needed to do was have courage and trust in God. The final quality of godly leaders is that there are people who put God first. When Moses led Israel out of Egypt, one of the young men who quickly rose to the recognition was Joshua. As I read earlier, Joshua was one of the chosen 12 spies to enter the land that God had promised to Israel. And though the vast majority of the spies returned with discouraging report of the land God said He would give them, Joshua and Caleb reported all the wonderful things God would provide in Canaan. He took the positive spin. You know, they could have spent all this time looking at the giants, looking at how big they were, and the negatives, but he focused on the positives this morning. But the people of Israel refused to enter the land God had given. Patiently, Joshua trusted God. He recognized the authority Moses and his position of leadership that God gave him. And Joshua never tried to usurp the authority of Moses. He waited until it was his time to lead Israel into the promised land. Joshua was an obedient follower. He was also known as a strong leader of Israel as they conquered the land God had given them. It is an amazing thing that happens when godly leaders put God first. People catch the vision and desire to be put part of the team. Notice that people what the people said to Joshua in verse 16 and 18. They answered Joshua, "Whatever you have commanded us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whoever you may command them will be put to death. Or whatever you may command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." The most important quality that these people desired from a new leader is that he showed them the same characteristic of putting God first. They understood and had proven under the leadership of Moses the faithfulness of God. They knew that God would provide, that God would protect them as long as they were obedient to him. As I already mentioned this morning, I can't stress how grateful I am for the leadership that we have here. We have men and women who have a servant's heart. We have men and women who have proven to be people who are courageous. And most importantly, we have men and women who desire to put God first. And I'm sure these are not the qualities that the world looks at. When they hire a leader of a political party or when they hire managers, that's not one of the questions they ask them. Do you have a servant's heart? Are you courageous? I'm certainly sure they don't ask them, do you put God first? That's the question we need to ask when we look at leaders in our church. People who are potential leaders of the church. These people are not prepared to put God first. It's easy for the church to go astray. We always have to be about the Father's business, don't we? Always have to be about the Father's business this morning.